Let us begin by reading the word problem out loud. Fred always has difficulty managing his expenses on his debit card. After making a utilities payment of $152 and then spending $20 on gasoline, he is now $47 in debt. How much money did Fred have on his debit card before his two expenses? So let us begin our strategy for problem solving. The first step is always to analyze the problem. And when analyzing the problem, the first thing you want to identify is the question being asked. So in this case, the question is, how much money did Fred have on his debit card before his two expenses? So that's the question being asked. So now we know what it is exactly we want to find. So we can actually go ahead and jump to step 2 and assign a variable. So let us go ahead and do so. Keep in mind that we want our assignment of the variable to reflect the question being asked. So therefore, we'll go ahead and use the variable x, and we're going to let x represent the amount of money Fred had on his debit card before his two expenses. So there we go. Again, it's simply the question reworded in the form of a statement. So now let us go back to analyzing the problem. So let's see. What do we know? Well, for starters, Fred has difficulty managing his expenses, but that doesn't really help us. So let's go ahead and continue on. After making a utilities payment of $152, okay, so we have something there. So we know he made a utilities payment of $152, and then he also spent $20 on gasoline. So we also have that. And we know that after that, he is now $47 in debt. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and try to create an equation from that. So let's go ahead and start off our equation. Well, the question was, how much money did Fred have on his debit card before his two expenses? So before any of the expenses happened, he had X amount of money. And again, X represents the amount of money Fred had on his debit card before his two expenses, which is what we assigned it to be in step 2. And now he had this amount of money, and we know he made a utilities payment of $152. So whenever you make a payment, you lose money. So in this case, we're going to subtract from that 152. Again, that's because making a payment is an indicator of subtraction. And then we know that after that, he spent another $20 on gasoline. So again, spending is an indicator of subtraction. So we're going to subtract from that an additional $20. And now we know that after these two expenses, he is now $47 in debt. So we'll go ahead and use the number 47. But it's not going to be a positive 47. Since he's in debt, he owes 47. So that's money that's not in his debit card. So it's going to be a negative 47. And again, because debt is also an indicator of subtraction. So there we go. Quick little summary. Payment is an indicator of subtraction. Spending is an indicator of subtraction. And debt is an indicator of negativity. So that's going to go ahead and be our equation. Now let's go ahead and solve it. Remember that when solving an equation, you want to start off with the original equation that we created in step 3. So it's going to be x minus 152 minus 20 is equal to negative 47. Now I'm going to rewrite all these negative numbers on the left as addition. So here we go. So minus 152 that's the same thing as plus a negative 152. And then minus 20, that's the same thing as plus a negative 20. And we know this is equal to negative 47. So there we go. So now we're going to want to combine terms on the left-hand side. The two terms that we can combine are the negative 152 and the negative 120. So since they're the same sign and we're adding them, we could go ahead and just simply add them like any two numbers. So I'm going to do that off to the top right as scratch work. So I'm going to do negative 152 plus a negative 20. So then again, keep in mind that they are the same sign. So we're only going to get more negative. And then we're going to add them up like any other numbers. So 2 plus 0 gives us 2. 5 plus 2 gives us 7. And then we're just going to bring the 1 down. So combining these two numbers, we get x plus a negative 172. And that's going to be equal to negative 47. So now what we want to do is we want to get rid of this addition of a negative value. Since we're adding a negative 172, the opposite of a negative number is a positive number. So we're going to want to eliminate this negative 172 by adding a positive 172 to both sides. So let us go ahead and do so. So we'll end up with x plus a negative 172 is equal to negative 47. And then as mentioned, we're going to go ahead and add 172 to both sides. So on the left hand side, the negative 172 cancels out with the positive 172. And we're left simply with x. Then I'm going to go ahead and color code that. And now on the right hand side, we have negative 47 plus 172. Now again, keep in mind that addition is commutative, so the order does not matter when adding two integers. So we can rearrange this as, instead of the 172 coming second, we'll have it come first. And then we'll have the negative 147 come second. But now, as mentioned earlier, subtraction is the same thing as adding a negative. So here we're adding a negative, and we know that's the same thing as subtraction. So ideally, I'm going to go ahead and rewrite this, and I'm going to scoot it on up right here. We have x is equal to 172 minus 47. And again, that's because adding a negative is the same thing as subtraction and vice versa. So all we really need to do is 172 minus 47. And we're going to go ahead and do that off to the scratch work. Let me clear this off real quick. So here we go. We're going to go ahead and do that right here. So we'll have 172 and we're going to subtract from that 47. So we're going to do 2 minus 7, but 2 is less than 7, so the 2 has to borrow from the 7 next door. So that becomes a 6. and then our 2 now becomes a 12. So now we're going to do 12 minus 7, which is going to give us a 5. 6 minus 4 gives us a 2, and we bring down the 1. So there we go. We end up with x is equal to 125. So that's going to be our solution. So now let us go ahead and state the conclusion clearly. Since the question asked how much money did Fred have on his debit card before his 2 expenses, we're going to go ahead and state the conclusion as Fred had $125 on his debit card before his 2 expenses. So now let us go ahead and check the result. Remember, when checking the result, you always want to start off with the original equation found in step 3. So we're going to have x minus 152 minus 20 equals negative 47. But we know x is equal to 125, so we're going to substitute that in. And then everything else will remain the same for now. Negative 47. So now we're going to go ahead and rewrite everything as addition of a negative on the left hand side. So we're going to do that with these 2 values right here. So we're going to have 125. Now subtraction is the same thing as adding a negative. So we're going to add a negative 152. And then again, subtraction is the same thing as adding a negative. So we're going to add a negative 20. That is equal to negative 47. Now we already showed that negative 152 plus negative 20, we already showed this to be equal to negative 172. So I'm going to go ahead and bring that down. So 125 plus a negative 172. And again, those are the 2 numbers that we showed up here. And now that's going to be equal to negative 47. So now here we have 125 plus a negative 172. So we're going to go ahead and take the absolute value of both numbers. And we're going to have the absolute value of negative 172 is a positive 172. And the absolute value of 125 is 125. So of these 2, the bigger is the negative 172. It's distance away from 0. So therefore, when we do our subtraction, we're going to do the 172 up top. The bigger one always goes on top in terms of absolute value. And then we'll do the 125 at the bottom. Oh, correction. Let me go ahead and correct that. That's going to be a 172 minus a 125. So now we're going to do the 2 minus the 5. We can't do that, so we have to borrow from the 6 next door. And therefore our 2 becomes a 12. So now we're going to do 12 minus 5, which is 7. And then 6 minus 2 gives us a 4. And then 1 minus 1 gives us a 0. But now keep in mind that the 172 was originally a negative value. So we're going to have to carry that negative sign through. So we end up with a negative 47 on the left and a negative 47 on the right. And we ask ourselves, are these two values equal? And they are indeed equal, so that's how we know our solution is correct.